This really hurts low-income home buyers, first-time home buyers, minority home buyers, and definitely veterans. Veterans are a major loser in this as it currently stands.
Welcome back to another episode of L Podcast. Today's guest is Brooklee Han, a real estate reporter at Homebuyer. Thank you, Brooklee, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I think maybe not a lot of people, but some people are aware of the recent real estate commission lawsuits that refer to a series of class action lawsuits filed against the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, and other major real estate companies. They are alleging antitrust violations and inflated commission fees. The lawsuits claim that the defendants conspired to fix commission rates, reducing competition and resulting in higher costs for home buyers and sellers. And these class action lawsuits, if they are to take hold, I think starting sometime in July, there will be a change to how real estate transactions are conducted in the U.S., with changes to the commission structure in terms of what you're paying out to your real estate agent. So can you take us through the start of these lawsuits?
Yeah, absolutely. So these lawsuits really started back in 2019. And the two kind of original lawsuits are the Sitzer-Burnett and the Morrill lawsuits. And the only one of all of these lawsuits, because now there's probably well over 24, I've lost track, that has gone to trial, is the Sitzer-Burnett suit. That one was filed in Missouri, and the Morrill suit was filed in Illinois. These two lawsuits were filed by home sellers, and the defendants in the two lawsuits are identical. It was National Association of Realtors, RE/MAX, Keller Williams, Home Services of America, and Anywhere, which owns brands like ERA, Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, Century 21, Coldwell Banker, Corcoran, and Sotheby's. So those 6 real estate brands fall under the Anywhere umbrella. And as you said, in these lawsuits, the home seller plaintiffs alleged that these real estate industry players were colluding to artificially inflate real estate agent commissions. And at the center of all of this is the NAR's participation rule, which requires listing brokers to make a blanket offer of compensation to buyer brokers in order to list a property on a Realtor Association affiliated multiple listing service. So obviously what most consumers know and how they browse for real estate is somewhere like Realtor.com or Zillow or Redfin or Homes.com. And a lot of those sites use what's called an IDX feed, and those feeds come from your local multiple listing service. And the MLS is kind of, well, it's like those books that you used to get at like the diner, but now it's all online, and that's where all of the listing information is about the property. And so those two lawsuits kind of progressed along for a couple of years, and the trial date was set for the Sitzer-Burnett lawsuit, which occurred in October of 2023. Prior to that trial occurring in September, both RE/MAX and Anywhere settled the Sitzer-Burnett and the Morrill lawsuits, reaching a nationwide settlement agreement with the plaintiffs. Anywhere settled for $55 million. RE/MAX settled for $55 million, and Anywhere settled for $83.5 million. And those two agreements were granted preliminary approval in mid-November of 2023, and actually on Thursday, May 9th, so 2 days from when we're recording this, the final approval hearing is occurring for those two settlement agreements. But after those two companies settled, those two defendants settled, the suit went to trial. And on Halloween, on October 31st of 2023, a federal jury in Kansas City found NAR, Keller Williams, and Home Services of America liable for colluding to artificially inflate real estate agent commissions. This was obviously just the jury verdict, and as part of the jury verdict, the damages awarded were $1.8 billion. Because this is a federal antitrust suit, the plaintiffs are allowed to ask the judge in his final ruling to treble this amount, which would have been $5.3 billion. Obviously, that was just the jury verdict. And at that point in time, we were all still kind of waiting for what the judge's final ruling on what the preliminary injunction, so what the policy changes he would ask for or behavior changes he would ask for of the defendants, as well as what his thoughts were on the damages award that was being given by the jury. And, in the days and months after the verdict, There obviously were a lot of unanswered questions about what was going to happen with the industry. There were also a ton of copycat lawsuits filed. It started almost immediately with the lead plaintiff's attorney in the Sitzer Burnett suit filing a lawsuit, which is known as the Gibson suit, literally within hours of that jury verdicts coming out. And then it just kept kind of piling on across the country. And still, we're seeing a couple more of those copycat lawsuits pop up here and there. But then things kept progressing. And on February 1st of this year, Keller Williams, which was one of the defendants in the original lawsuits, reached a nationwide settlement like Anywhere and Remax. They settled for $70 million. And that was obviously a big deal. That one was granted preliminary approval almost immediately. And so KW joins the other two companies, Remax and Anywhere, with that final approval hearing on May 9th. So that's something that I, as a journalist, am keeping very close tabs on this week. But then the big news, which you referenced, was on March 15th, the Ides of March, which felt very appropriate. The National Association of Realtors reached a nationwide settlement agreement for the commission lawsuits for $418 million. And in addition to the monetary amount, they agreed to a variety of business practice changes. And this is kind of what you were getting at earlier. And some of those business practice changes include that agents are no longer allowed to list offers of cooperative compensation. So meaning that I, as the listing agent, will split the commission with the buyer's agent on the MLS. They're also not allowed to create or facilitate a non-MLS mechanism for sellers, home sellers, to make offers of compensation. And in addition, all MLS participants, so all agents and brokers working with buyers, must enter into a written buyer-broker agreement prior to touring a home with that buyer. And these changes, National Association of Realtors announced last week that these changes must be implemented by August 17th of this year. So a little bit longer runway than originally anticipated. And the settlement was granted preliminary approval in mid-April, so that was kind of the first hurdle cleared. And it has a final approval hearing scheduled for November 26th, 2024. So 2 days before Thanksgiving. This lawsuit really loves to occur around holidays or things like that. But the settlement did not release all parties in the real estate industry. There was a carve out that had to be created in conversations I've had with National Association of Realtors, with Kevin Sears, the current president of NAR. Basically, it was kind of what ended up being the best case scenario, unfortunately, for a lot of these players, for a settlement to occur just in general. And basically what happens is companies that had a sales volume of over $2 billion in 2022, so brokerages that had a sales volume of over $2 billion. So we're looking at big firms like EX Compass, Redfin. Those companies were not included under the terms of the settlement. And so they have an option to opt in to the NAR settlement by paying a certain amount. That amount with the mathematical formula that's in place is very high, or they, of course, can negotiate their own settlement. And so that's kind of what we're seeing a lot right now. So far, we've had Redfin at Properties, which owns Christie's International Real Estate, Compass, The Real Brokerage, Realty One Group, Redfin, and Douglas Elliman, as well as Home Services of America, one of the original defendants, have all settled. So that's kind of where we are now. Obviously, there are some big changes and a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of concerns as well about kind of financing. We'll see how things kind of get worked out in the next couple of months as we approach this August 17th deadline.
There's a lot of separate players in this real estate game. Basically, the total market cap of the stock market is somewhere around $51 trillion in the U.S., and the total market cap of residential housing in the U.S. is somewhere also around $52 trillion. Real estate is a massive, for the average person, it's their greatest source of wealth. So this has massive implications, or potentially massive implications, for people that are buying and selling houses. So can you tell us what are the real world implications starting, I guess, in August instead of July, when I, mentioned this in the beginning? So let's just start from, say, the person that's selling a house. Let's start with the seller, and then let's go to the person buying the house.
So if you as a seller want to list your home, obviously you have multiple options to do so. We have FSBOs for sale by owners. And then there's a variety of different brokerages out there that offer a scale of services. So maybe you just want to go to someone that's just going to basically list your home on the MLS for you. And then even some of those firms or companies have like a la carte services where you can pay extra for professional photography, or you can pay extra for, different services here or there. Or I think what most people are accustomed to or know about is going to a full service broker where someone will, come in, they're the agent that you work with. They'll help you prep the home for sale, tell you what you need to fix or how to stage it, or, what personal objects you need to take down. And then they'll schedule the open house. They'll get the property listed on the MLS. They'll get signs. They'll host the open house. They'll help facilitate tours. And then when offers start coming in, they will help you negotiate with the buyer to their fiduciary duty is to you as the seller. And so they should be trying to sell up your home and make sure that you get the most money for this, as you said, kind of your greatest asset that you own, so that you can use that money to achieve your other financial goals, whether it's buying a different property or something else altogether. And as the seller, you have always been able to negotiate the commission that you are paying to your agent. And the way that works is you work with your agent and determine what services they're providing you and the value that you will value that at. And usually it's a percentage of the sale price of the home. And it'll fall in a range. The overall commission will typically fall in a range from about 4 to 6%. Commissions have been trending down recently. As it currently works, the listing agent, if this is the route you choose to go down as the seller, will then split that commission either 50-50 or some other way with the buyer's agent, with whoever brings you a buyer. So on the seller's side, under all of these changes, you will now only be negotiating with your agent for the commission you will be paying them. As a seller, I could still be willing to offer cooperative compensation. I could still be willing to help the buyer cover some of those buyer representation fees. I could also be willing to help them cover closing costs, as some sellers are in certain types of markets. And so it kind of will work. It works in a similar way to that. Currently, on the buy side, as it operates with the system of cooperative compensation, you can negotiate with your buyer's agent, obviously, how much you want to pay them for their services. And again, just like with the seller, you can go to a buyer's agent for a variety of, on a scale. Obviously, if you choose to go unrepresented, that is your personal choice and something you are able to do if you really want to. You can also work with an a la carte service broker or a flat fee broker, or you can kind of go the full service model, basically, which again, I think is the model that most people are at least accustomed to or aware of or think about generally. And with that, obviously, you work with your agent, you find a home, you send in an offer, and then your agent is compensated based on that commission split with the listing agent. And again, it might be 50-50, it might be something else of that, 4 to 6% of the overall list price or sale price of the home. But under the terms of the NAR settlement, as long as it is granted final approval, as a buyer, I approach a buyer's agent now because I choose to go that route and I want to tour a home. I will now have to sign a buyer representation agreement in order to work with that agent. And that representation agreement outlines the services that the agent will be providing me. It outlines the length of time of the agreement, whether this is an exclusive relationship or a non-exclusive relationship, and then also how much I am going to compensate my agent for helping me successfully purchase a home. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation around this because You don't want to go into a long-term relationship with this buyer's agent if it's, say you're a first-time home buyer, you're new to the area, and you don't necessarily know this person that well. So there's a lot of kind of experimentation and thought going around with this about, different types of agreements and whether you want to have a non-exclusive agreement or an exclusive agreement. And, maybe the agreement is only for a week or two and it's not exclusive. And if you decide that this is the agent you want to work with, then you can assign an exclusive agreement that's more binding. And then if you want to go a different direction, well, you can because it's not exclusive. And then the contract just expires with that other agent, and that's fine. But obviously now, when going into a transaction, once that final contract is signed, that buyer's agent knows how much they will be compensated by that client prior to any home tours occurring, basically. And so now, say you're a buyer, you find this house that you want to put an offer on, and you don't necessarily have the funds or the cash on hand to pay your buyer's agent out of pocket. So you're going to ask the seller to help you with some of those costs. And now it's up to the seller to decide if they're going to engage in cooperative compensation or not. Now, if you're an all cash buyer and you do have the extra cash on hand, you could just pay your agent out of your own pocket. But the bigger issue right now, or one of the biggest issues, is it's unclear whether you will be allowed to finance that buyer representation costs if the seller is unwilling to engage in cooperative compensation. Obviously, this is an extra cost added on to the sale price of the home. And so now, if you don't have that cash on hand, you would need to finance that representation fee. And so both the NAR, the Mortgage Bankers Association, and other trade groups are working with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to figure out if that would be allowed, because it is unclear if that would be allowed based on current guidelines. What is very clear is that veterans trying to use their VA loan benefit are completely not allowed to pay for buyer representation. So if a veteran wants to use a VA loan right now and the seller will not engage in cooperative compensation, they either have to go into the transaction unrepresented or they cannot use their VA loan benefit. So, they're both National Association of Realtors, the Mortgage Bankers Association, and Community Home Lenders of America, as well as others in the industry, are trying to work with the Department of Veterans Affairs to kind of get some guidance on that, so veteran home buyers are not disadvantaged by these changes that are most likely going to go into place in August and most likely be permanent after the final approval hearing in November.
So basically, this lawsuit is going to essentially decouple the agent fees from the person that's selling the house. Because currently, the median house in the U.S. sells for something around, say, $400,000. We'll just say 6% of, you said that the commission fees are for the real estate agent is 4 to 6%. So we'll say 6% of that's $24,000. Half of that, or 3%, would go to the agent selling the house. So that's $12,000. The other half of that, $24,000, would go to the agent that's helping the person buy the house. So it seems to me the real estate agent that's selling the house, not much would actually be different, because the real estate fees are essentially baked into the mortgage for the person, yeah. Right, the sale price. But the person that's buying the house, now that it's decoupled, the person that's selling the house is essentially paying for the fees for the person buying the house. But ultimately, then the person that's taking out the loan is essentially paying for both, but the person selling the house is actually losing the money. So it kind of is convoluted the way that you look at it. But then hypothetically, if with these changes, if the person that's buying the house is not able to bake this 3% that of their half of the 6%, if they're not able to bake that in, then their down payment, the median down payment in the U.S. is 15%. So on say a $300,000 house, that's $45,000. So if they had to pay $9,000, which would be their 3% in this case, that means they would have $36,000 for a down payment, which would mean that they could only afford, say, a $240,000 house. So is that what we're going to see, some kind of downward pressure on the actual cost of housing. One of my friends has been a real estate agent in Denver since 1983, and I've asked him about this, and he's like, we've had so many DOJ lawsuits over the years. He's like, nothing's really changed. The whole reason that we even had Redfin and Realtor.com and things like that is because of a 2008 DOJ lawsuit, which opened up some access to the MLS. Anyways, I guess the real estate agents maybe make less money because if you're buying it on Zillow, I think that they're taking part of the real estate agent's commission, but not a whole lot has actually changed since then. Even has it? I guess I said a lot. You can kind of take that in any order.
Yeah, no, we can definitely unpack some of that. So with Zillow has a preferred agent program, and if you are a Zillow preferred agent and you that real estate agent gets your lead, so like your business from Zillow, then if you successfully transact a house with that agent, then yes, Zillow does get part of the commission based on kind of, if you're in their flex program, they get part of the commission. Otherwise, the agent is paying Zillow for those leads to come in, regardless if they close successfully or not. But if you find your house on Zillow, but you're working with, your hairdresser's cousin that's your agent that you've worked with previously, that obviously Zillow would not get a cut of that, unless obviously he's already a preferred agent and paying those fees, like no matter what. But kind of going back, their home prices are not going to go down because of this. There will be, if home buyers are unable to finance buyer representation fees on top of their overall mortgage, then there will be downward pressure on buyers, like their ability to purchase houses, basically. And housing affordability will be that much more unattainable for a lot of home buyers if they choose to work with a real estate agent. Obviously, that is their choice. But I mean, there's a lot of concerns, obviously, about being an unrepresented buyer. There are an increased number of lawsuits with unrepresented buyers versus buyers that are represented, just because things pop up, like they don't have the world's greatest inspector working for them, and there's a bunch of issues with the house that don't get discovered until after closing, and they go to do a renovation or something. And so there's definitely concerns about that. But no, I mean, in talking with agents and covering the industry, the levels of demand as well as inventory is what sets the price of a house, not the commission that the agent is trying to get. Typically, I mean, maybe there's some bad real estate agents out there that do things that way. Obviously, it's a massive industry. There are so many real estate agents, probably close to 2 million agents out there, and that could be happening in some few instances, but generally speaking, the market is what sets the price of the house. And right now, obviously, interest rates are higher than they've been in a while, obviously still close to long-term medians and long-term averages, but there's so little housing inventory that despite interest rates going up, home prices are continuing to rise in most metro areas, and changes to commission structures is not going to change that. This will change things, though, in that it's going to add more steps to the home buying process. It will, possibly, if home sellers choose not to engage in cooperative compensation, make it harder for some home buyers to purchase houses because they are unable to have as large of a budget because they have to pay their agent out of their own pocket, or they're having to do things on their own because they can't afford representation. There are so many steps and unknown things to the general consumer that go on behind the scenes in a real estate transaction that they would then be responsible for. That just makes it harder and more of a burden on the home buyer as well if they choose to go unrepresented. So I do think that there are going to be changes. Obviously, there are changes that have been outlined with like implementing buyer broker agreements. Obviously, there are 20 states that already require that, but there are some places that are like, talk to agents in certain states and like, we've never used this before. And so we're going to have to figure it out. As much as there's going to be challenges, I think it's also a positive for the industry. It's increasing transparency with consumers because now it's very clear what your expectations are as a buyer from your buyer's agent. Whereas before, it might not have been as clear. You used to do a listing presentation when you'd go in to list someone's house. And so now they're doing the same thing with buyers, and they want that value proposition really clear. You didn't know what to expect, and to have a clear outline of what the goal is and what the relationship will look like moving forward. Because of that, I think a lot of people in the industry are expecting a turn to greater professionalism within the real estate industry. As I said, there are close to 2 million agents in the real estate industry, but very few of them transact a lot of business. Most do 0 to 1 transactions a year. And so we're expecting to see a decrease in the casual agents. And obviously this will leave the more professional agents that do have those higher standards and are, just better at their job because they have more experience and they practice it on a daily basis versus someone that maybe does 1 or 2 transactions a year for friends and family.
So who are the winners and who are the losers in this?
I don't think it's necessarily completely clearly cut. To a certain extent, consumers, they win in the sense that the agents that they will probably be working with in the future are more professional, they're better at their jobs. They also win in the sense that there's greater transparency in what's going on. They also are losers, though, because, unless they are independently wealthy or have the funds to pay for their own buyers' representation, they either will have to go unrepresented or will have to kind of possibly lower their budget in order to pay out of pocket for that buyer representation. Obviously, this really hurts low-income home buyers, first-time home buyers, minority home buyers, and definitely veterans. Veterans are a major loser in this as it currently stands. Obviously, there are actions that could take place. Fannie and Freddie could change their guidelines. The Department of Veterans Affairs could undergo formal rulemaking and change kind of their requirements as well. But that's a big ask of the government in a very short timeline. So, we'll see what happens, I think, with that. But other than kind of this increased transparency and professionalism in the industry, I don't necessarily think there are really any kind of winners to what's happening. I think those are the best outcomes of this situation, but it's definitely going to create some challenges. And also, we still haven't seen things kind of pan out fully. And, we'll see what exactly happens in the industry and kind of with the housing market once these changes come into place in August.
The NAR, National Association of Realtors, was founded in 1908 as the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges. Obviously, that was quite a few years before the internet. And I was reading a study from 2010, 2011. It's actually hard to find studies past that date, but they said that about 50% of people, again, 2011, which is basically a couple of years after the iPhone came out, were finding their houses online, not even really using the real estate agent's expertise to locate houses. Now it's probably something like, I'd imagine 90% of people or something probably find their house online. And when I was talking to my friend that was a real estate agent since 1983, he's like, well, people find their house, but he's like, when you hire a real estate agent, you're hiring someone to do contracts, inspections, title, someone that has that kind of expertise more so than finding a house. Is this an industry that actually needs to have changes? If we're going back to 1908, obviously you're talking well over a century ago. Do we even need to have the NAR right now?
Yeah, the National Association of Realtors obviously has been going through a bit of a trying time the past couple of months, or more than a couple of months now. In addition to dealing with these lawsuits, there was also a sexual harassment scandal. As I mentioned, Kevin Sears, the current president, was their third president to come into office between end of August and mid-January of this year. So there's been a lot of upheaval. Their, longtime CEO retired early. Other individuals within leadership roles within the company or within the trade association left. So they've been dealing with a lot on top of all of these commission lawsuits. And a lot of agents are asking, what is NAR even doing for us right now? Because leading into the lawsuits, the rhetoric was very positive. Leading into the Sitzer Burnett trial, the rhetoric was very positive. We're going to win. It's going to be fine. Don't worry. Obviously, it was not fine. And yes, worry. But a lot of professionals felt that they lacked that guidance, and they were looking to the National Association of Realtors for that guidance, and it just wasn't there. That is definitely a hurdle that they're currently dealing with. In my dealings with NAR as a journalist, I found that Kevin Sears has been a lot more open and willing to engage in conversations, more casual conversations than previous NAR presidents. And I feel like the trade organization is trying to open itself up a little bit more and have more of a dialogue with both the press as well as its members. But I think a lot of people still support NAR because of the lobbying work they do. Obviously, it's a massive trade industry. And as you said, the real estate industry is like the largest industry in the country. And so, obviously with the, outcomes the industry would like to see with Department of Veterans Affairs right now and Fannie and Freddie, they're looking to NAR for that lobbying and to help put that pressure on to try to get some of these changes enacted. And so I think, the lobbying arm of NAR is kind of one of the reasons why it still exists. Obviously, there are others, but I think that's one of the main things. But yes, it was definitely time for a change within the real estate industry. There were a lot of, not unprofessional, but agents that are more casual. They're not the full-time agents. They're not the most experienced, and they're not providing consumers with the best experience and the best guidance possible on what is usually the biggest purchase of their lives. And so a lot of agents within the industry and brokers and professionals are happy about that change because they feel like the barrier to entry has been really low. And we saw a lot of people enter the industry at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic because the real estate industry was going crazy and deals were coming fast and loose. And agents didn't really have to learn how to be good at real estate, how to be, how to really truly professionally transact in this business. They just had to be quick, basically. And some of those agents have already left because of the slowdown in the market. And obviously others have gained the expertise needed to succeed in where the market is right now. But generally, I think people are excited to have a smaller pool of agents, but one that's more professional and better serves consumers and helps consumers have a better experience in what is their biggest purchase.
Between real estate agent and realtors, to be a realtor, you got to be part of NAR, but you can still be a real estate agent, right, without being part of NAR. But basically, there's like 2 million agents. And I was reading studies that said that there probably should be somewhere around a million or basically between 800,000 and a million if you actually got rid of a lot of, like you're mentioning, a lot of agents don't even sell a house a year, or if they do, it's like one or two. I told you my buddy that was a real estate agent since 1983. He says in his experience, it's just a lot of bored housewives that want to, like, oh, hey, I'm a real estate agent. It's just something to like say that they do when they don't really do much.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will get a license at a time like 2020, 2021, where the market's going crazy and they're like, oh, hey, this is a quick way to make a little extra money. And then, they might help some people, some family, some friends purchase a house, but they're kind of fumbling along, not really knowing what they're doing. And then, they might just hold on to their license for a while and continue helping out the odd family member or friend that, purchases or sells a house. But it's, it won't be the best consumer experience, even though you are working with someone that you know and trust, but that's not what they do on a daily basis. And so they're not as well versed in how to transact.
Do you think that we will actually see, after these effects take place in August, that we will see 800 to a million? You think it's really going to shake out half of the real estate agents out of the industry?
Honestly, I'm not sure if it'll be half, but I definitely think some people will leave the industry. I know, obviously, there's some that were on the verge of retirement that are now like, you know what, I'm just going to retire early. There are some that just got into it casually and are like, you know what, I don't feel like figuring all of these changes out. There are some people that are leaving not because of this at all, but because the housing market has slowed down so much that they're just like, you know what, I'm going to go do something else. So, will it be half? I don't know. Time will tell, but definitely expecting some contraction within the overall agent count.
How many people do you think that buy a house even know how the fee structure is split up? I have a buddy, he owns 3 houses, and I was talking about the 6% split, and he's like, I had no idea how it worked. He's like, if I had to pay my agent out of my own pocket, I wouldn't hire an agent. If you're talking a $400,000 house, I think most people wouldn't want to pay $12,000 out of their pocket. It's all like value proposition, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you getting $12,000 worth of value on a median house of $400,000 to each, buying agent and the selling agent? I think most people would probably be like, no.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on obviously the experience that you're looking for in working with your agent. And as I said, you can go unrepresented. And there's also flat fee models as well, where you can pay for a la carte services. Like, I'll pay you X amount for writing a contract for me, or I'll pay you, X amount for helping with negotiations, and this much for taking me on a home tour. So there's definitely different models, and that's something else we're expecting to see is kind of more experimentation with some of these models moving forward. And obviously no one knows what will happen, but definitely thinking that we'll see some different models pop up. But, different people value what their agent provides them differently, obviously. And there are some agents that aren't necessarily great at what they do. And would they be worth that $12,000? Probably not. But is there another agent that goes above and beyond and was exceptional and probably worth more than that $12,000 on a $400,000 median price home? Yeah, definitely. So, it depends on the level of service the agent is providing and what you as a consumer are looking for. And you as a consumer can definitely do the research to kind of figure out what type of agent or what type of brokerage best fits your needs.
And just to clarify, on this hypothetical median $400,000 house, $12,000 to the buying agent, $12,000 to the selling agent, they also work for a brokerage house, so they might be getting 25 to 50% of that, right? So it's not
Absolutely.
like they're not taking home, say, that 12,000. And if they work for Caldwell or something like that, they're giving them a split. But it just seems like there's a lot of hands that are going into and I think this is the whole reason for this lawsuit. In the US, if you're paying 6%, essentially you're selling a house, you're paying that full 6% real estate fees. That's quite high compared to other countries around the world.
Yes, it is. However, with some of the other models, the additional costs are much higher. And so it works out to be usually more than what you end up paying in the US. And then also, I know like in Australia, most houses are purchased via auction, and you as a buyer go in unrepresented, and you are working with a seller who is represented. So already you're kind of at a disadvantage, right? Because you probably don't negotiate home prices on a daily basis, whereas that selling agent definitely does. And so that already is a handicap. I've had a lot of friends in Australia purchase houses and end up paying way more than they should have for those properties because they didn't have the expertise of a buyer's agent telling them, like, no, you need to stop bidding because this is way too much for this property. And, there's definitely a little bit of buyer's remorse in that situation. And you end up paying more than you need to because you don't have representation and you're paying over market value for the property. So yes, the agent fees might not be there, but you pay for that in a different way.
But how much motivation does the buying agent have to lower the price, though? Because if the buying agent in the U.S. is lowering the price of the sale, they're, of course, lowering their commission. They're kind of like reverse incentivized to really fight for the buyer anyway. So I'm not even sure how much of an impact it would have.
That is definitely a concern. And obviously, the buyer's agent does have a fiduciary duty to the buyer, which would be to negotiate that price lower, which is, I think, one of the main reasons why this buyer representation agreement is being put in place, because then no matter what you're paying for that house, that is the amount the buyer's agent is paying. You as a buyer's agent is receiving. So it's whatever that price tag is, no matter if you end up purchasing a $450,000 home or a $425,000 home, that dollar amount is what the agent is getting no matter what. And so that, I think, obviously agents in theory should, and the ones I've spoken with say it doesn't happen, but they're not supposed to steer buyers to certain properties because of commission levels. I'm sure with some of those more casual agents, it probably does because they're looking to make more money from the few transactions that they actually close. But yeah, so that, I think, by having that buyer representation agreement and having outlined how much you as a buyer's agent are receiving from your client ahead of time before you even go look at a house, I think that is definitely a solid way to, help get rid of that concern about steering or, the buyer's agent not fulfilling their fiduciary duty.
Earlier in this podcast, you said that you didn't think the price would go lower, right? Because you're saying it's supply demand, has nothing really to do with what the agent commission is. The last major housing recession, of course, we all know was basically the 2007, 2008 great financial crisis or whatever, whatever you want to call it. We all have seen The Big Short and, plenty of movies on this. And, right now the median house is like well over I think it's like $140,000 more than it was at the height of the recession in 2008. So do you think that housing prices are just going to keep going up and up? They've gone down a little bit, I think, the last couple of years, but they're still, like I said, well over 100,000 above what they were pre-08. So do you think that we're going to keep seeing the housing prices go up? Ultimately, the only thing that the average person cares about is like, how is this lawsuit and settlement going to impact whether you're trying to sell a house or trying to buy a house? And you don't think that the prices are going to go down. Do you think they're going to go down at some point? Are they just going to keep going up? It seems like it just can't keep going on like this. It seems like they're overvalued when you analyze the market, but maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think home price growth at the height of the pandemic market was insane. I mean, in some markets, it was like over 30% year over year equity gain, which is insane. Most markets have cooled considerably since then, which is good. Healthy home price growth or equity gain each year is about 2 to 5%, which is kind of what we generally want to see for a healthy, stable market. But I mean, no, I don't unless something really truly drastic occurs, which obviously there's always the possibility for, I don't expect to see home prices to drop dramatically. And I definitely do not think that these lawsuits or the effects of them will have any impact on home prices. The only case in which it may have an impact on like a specific home and on its price is if a seller is unwilling to budge on offering cooperative compensation. And because of the price range that home is in, buyers generally, if they want representation, cannot afford to purchase that house and have representation if the seller is not willing to at least cover some of those representation fee costs. And in which case, the home would languish on the market. And then obviously there would be price cuts that would have to occur. And then eventually it would reach a point where a home buyer could purchase that house and have enough money to cover their buyer representation costs. But that would be that seller's choice to go that route. And, if it sits on the market long enough, the price is going to drop, for further than what it would have if the seller had been willing to at least give some of cooperative compensation to help the buyer pay their representation fees.
This is kind of off topic, but when I was researching you, I noticed that you were like a retired Olympic figure skater.
Yes.
And I'm just curious how you made the transition from like a world-class Olympic figure skater into the world of real estate journalism.
Yeah, so I kind of stumbled over into the world of real estate. I retired in 2019, was going to college and decided I wanted to pursue journalism. When I graduated, I was doing a lot of freelance work covering mainly sports because obviously given my background, that was something that I was interested in, and I really enjoy working with athletes. Both as a coach, I coach figure skating now, and then as a journalist as well. But was looking for a full-time gig because, the freelance hustle is a hard one, and definitely major kudos to anyone who is able to successfully navigate that. But yeah, ended up here at Housing Wire as a real estate reporter almost 3 years ago now. And wasn't necessarily my top choice of industries to cover, but I think I came in at a really interesting time. There's so much happening right now in the real estate industry, and it impacts so many facets of our lives. And, I think it definitely, there's more to it than I initially thought, which I think is great. And the more time I've spent in the industry, the more things I've realized I don't know and have had the chance to kind of uncover and dive into a little bit more deeply.
You think like being a competitive figure skater, it seems like to me like a lot of either former like pro athletes or really high level college athletes are always fairly good in business because it's like you're competitive, you work hard, you know how to work with team, but you still have the individual component of success. But it always seems like these athletes do fairly well later in life, even if they're not like, Aaron Rodgers or LeBron James or something, but still like very successful, as they kind of navigate post-retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a high performance athlete, you learn what you're capable of, and the work required to achieve those big goals that if you choose to set those for yourself again in this next kind of phase of life, you know what it takes to get there, and you know what you can expect from yourself. And I think that's really empowering knowledge to have. It also can be a little daunting at times because you know how hard you work to achieve, those previous goals. And sometimes there are days when you're like, okay, I don't necessarily know if I want to do all of that again. But no, I think it definitely, it is an advantage in that sense for sure. And you understand the value of hard work and goal setting and kind of going back to these lawsuits and all the changes in the industry. When I was talking to some executives recently about, how they're helping their agents deal with this, they're like, well, we're really working with them to focus on what they can control in this situation. And as an athlete, that is something that I heard all the time from my sports psychologists, from my coaches, because there is so much noise happening outside that you cannot control what's going on. And I think as an athlete, no matter what field you're going into post-retirement, if you're able to kind of tune out that noise, focus on what you can control to get your job done, that's really a key to success, because you're able to then dedicate your time, dedicate your focus onto what really matters to achieving the goals that you set for yourself.
Is it like women's figure skating the most watched Winter Olympic activity event?
I definitely know it's one of the most watched. I don't know if it is the top, but it's definitely probably one of the most popular for sure.
When I saw that, I was like, I wanted to keep it on topic, but I had to ask. It's pretty awesome. So, but anyways, today's guest is Brooklee Han, a real estate reporter at Housing Wire. And Brooklee, just tell people where they can find you or find your writing, your journalism information, things like that. And then secondly, just leave us with a final thought.
So all of my real estate coverage is on housingwire.com. Visit the website. Definitely some of the content is gated. So, if you're looking to dive in a little bit deeper or are an industry professional, definitely subscribe to our HW Plus membership. It is definitely worth it. Myself and my colleagues in our newsroom produce a ton of really great content about a variety of real estate topics, from mortgage, the secondary market, reverse mortgages. I also cover the title insurance industry, cybercrime, and fintech and prop tech companies as well. So if you're looking for all things housing, Housing Wire is definitely the place to go. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for having me today. I really enjoyed talking about this. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there about these commission lawsuits and the changes that'll occur. But, I think we're at a time where the industry is kind of digesting this news and feeling a little bit more optimistic and positive. And that's definitely where I want to, ideally see all of this go in the future. Obviously, there's going to be some growing pains, but, I think there is definitely some positives come out of all of this.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.